about branding for product diversification and marketing pastured poultry products. And it's really important, equally important, to develop our branding and marketing strategies as our farming systems, because pastured poultry products are distinctly better for many reasons than those with other kinds of production systems. And so what we need to do is figure out how to best describe and present the positive qualities of pastured poultry products and the production systems as we take our products to market. Regardless of scale, I want to help us develop the best possible methods of producing, branding, and marketing our pastured poultry products. Raising poultry, we're always learning. I grew up with a backyard flock of laying hens. Have the scar from the old white rooster to prove it. In this stage of my life, I raised 700 laying hens and sold the eggs to Chez Panisse restaurant and Monterey Market in Berkeley and the Davis Food Co-op and a small CSA. And learned a lot and began really thinking about how chickens could have vegetation. And so I've continued to learn a great deal about pastured poultry. I'm in my 14th year of being an organic inspector. Worked for QAI and Demeter, Stellar, as well as CCUF, for whom I still work. I've gotten to visit a lot of egg and meat bird operations throughout California, including one that ended up being audited for non-compliance by USDA as a result of my reporting their failure to provide outdoor access to their chickens. So, okay, running the technology here. So, I'm going to hope to share some of what I've learned then in the last couple of years. In California, we had a risk management agency project to provide workshops and farm tours throughout California. So we toured about a dozen different farms and with that. And then I've recently also done a food safety related to chickens as part of a beginning farmer rancher grant. So that tells you a little bit about my experience, and I think here are a few examples of some of the birds that we saw in the last year. Of course, we mostly talk about chickens when we're raising meat birds, but there are other species. Some people raise turkeys and some raise ducks. And so one has to decide what the right enterprise is for you. Is it choosing the right species and breeds, seasonal or year-round, and how they integrate with crops and livestock. Egg layers, let's see. So meat birds can be seasonal, which is, of course, a big advantage in a climate that gets very cold. Pastured laying hens, of course, is also a good possibility, and I'll show you some more pictures of kinds of systems in which that works well. You can have a meat bird operation without egg layers, but it's hard to have an egg layer operation without some component of meat birds, because they do have a very productive, a limit to their very productive lifetime, and one needs to make a decision about what to do with the egg layers once they start to molt. Will they become meat birds after a year of laying, when they start to, the rates of lay begin to diminish? And we can talk, if other people have specific questions about the specific, the upsides of saving the cost of raising a new flock versus the diminishing egg laying. Pastured poultry is so wonderful because it makes complementary use of the land. And there's a permaculture term of stacking, which is using the land for multiple purposes. Of course, they didn't mean it literally. The goats may have thought that they did, but usually the idea is just that certain animals follow other animals. Chickens and other poultry prefer to graze vegetation that's quite short. And ruminants, of course, are the perfect complement to that because they can mow the grass, and then the chickens can come and pick apart the dung and distribute the manure and help incorporate that into the soil, and the timing can make a really good system that protects the health of both species. Multi-species grazing were, some of the most successful operations we saw, I think, were combined with either beef operations or dairy farms that had existing pasture. And of course, it can be integrated with all kinds of crops. The one on the bottom left is a walnut orchard with meat birds. The one on the top left is laying hens on a dairy farm pasture. It can be integrated with annual crops, even strawberries, as long as the separation in time and or space is sufficient. Now, the general rule under the National Organic Program is that one needs to incorporate raw manure into the soil 120 days before harvest of a crop, such as strawberries, that would have contact with the soil. Kathy Hillmeyer has done some research on specific food pathogens and confirmed that if one follows that rule, you will have very little danger of any food pathogen coming from chicken manure into a subsequent crop. So that's reassuring that those line up. You know many of the benefits. High quality products is a big one. Healthy animals are outside. Farms diversified soil fertility. One of the farms we visited was Early Bird Farm and Left Coast Beef in Pescadero, and it started out just as a beef operation and then added in the pastured poultry. And they've seen the pastures greatly improved for the beef operation, so it's a mutual benefit. Natural resources, of course, recycling nutrients much more effectively by having both plants and animals together in rotation or integrated. And with the great possibility that there could be more regional food systems. I understand that most of the poultry consumed in Montana isn't grown in Montana, and maybe we could shift that. So there isn't yet a legal definition of pastured poultry, so I began looking at what we can pretty well describe it, though, even if the definition isn't legalized. Birds are outside, season permitting. There's housing, of course, and of course the small chicks, before they have feathering, they're inside in a protected environment. Once they're outside, they have fresh growing vegetation, and there's a commitment to the system's design. Other countries have systems that actually describe stocking rates, suggested stocking rates. But then we say, well, how do we represent these products? What makes the most sense? Branding is all around us, and it's the name, the term, the design, the symbol, the image, what it is that makes our products distinct from other products. It's the sum of all the valuable qualities to the consumer. Let's look at some of the examples of what that might be. And the key question here is, who cares? Both of those components are important. Who? Well, who is your customer? Who is the person who's eating this, and what do they care about? In order for a person to purchase a pastured poultry product, or any poultry product, it needs to be reasonably available to them. And what's reasonable? So the farmer's market is at the actual grocery store. Number of places, is it an institution, is it a restaurant? So many places that it can show up besides direct to consumer. So how do we increase the accessibility as part of the whole thinking about branding? Then part of the brand, of course, is the tangible experience. Once a person buys and eats something, is it good? Is it nutritious? Price is, of course, a factor about how accessible it is to people. So we have to work on pricing that covers the cost of production and yet is affordable. But in addition to the tangible experience, there's this whole, the ideals behind it. what is the greater good that I'm supporting when I buy this chicken or this dozen eggs? Some people care a great deal about animal welfare, more and more, even those who are very disconnected from their food supply. Many of us care about the environment. How many pesticides, are antibiotics being used? What about the watershed? Are the nutrients flowing into places where they're not needed and actually do harm? And then a lot of us care about local economy and farmers and community. So you start out with eggs and meat, right? And then we begin adding labels. So first, we need to make sure there are rules that the government has set in place to protect the consumer from food safety hazards and to know what's the source of the food and where does it come from. So these are some of the government requirements for labeling on eggs. And you can see examples of them on any egg carton. The grading. Eggs must be graded to be sold. It has to be clean. A number of these requirements. Similarly, in order to have the quality on meat, you have to have a similar set of pieces of information. Who raised it? Where did they come from? What is the product? What are the ingredients? How heavy? Has it been inspected or not? Or some appropriate exemption? Safe handling instructions.
Could you go back one slide, please?
Yes. To the chicken. To the eggs.
Egg, yes. Okay. I'm very unfamiliar with the sell date less than 30 days.
Right.
So they keep refrigerated. So that means that at your facility they can stay for 30 days, or they have to be sold at the store within 30 days?
Sold at the store. From the date of pack, the date that they're placed in the carton and the carton is stamped.
Okay.
They need to be sold within 30 days of that date.
Okay. And so that means you ship daily. You cannot keep it at your facility. It has to be packaged the day that they are hatched, in other words, what I was.
No, there's not as clear a rule about the day they're laid. This is from the date of pack, not the date of lay. So there's a possibility that they were gathered, stored, then washed and sanitized and packed, and then the date stamp goes on.
I see.
Who's Julian name?
Julian date is a consecutive date. January 1st is 1, January 2nd is 2, through 365. So this would be in May 144. We're 144 days into the calendar year.
Oh my.
So are these federal requirements, or are they, are there specific state requirements? Because I think I was looking at the state requirements for labeling on eggs. They're really similar, but I just was wondering if there's a difference there.
I'd have to look at the Montana state, and it is possible that I am from California, and these are definitely what's so in the California state law. So we can compare and see if there's any difference. But I would imagine some of these are federal. My intention was to have federal and have this be broadly applicable. We can double check any of the specific elements. And the handler plant code, California has a registration number. One has to register as if one sells eggs in California. But if you're over a 3,000 bird flock, then you have to have a USDA plant code. So the branding. So we started with the basic requirements, but then there's a lot of other additional things. So what do we see here? One of the common poultry products, smart chicken. So they have, they're beginning to use some of the things that they think will be attractive to people. Air chilled, it's either certified organic or certified humane. Then we have an Oscar Mayer product, which has a number of different virtues claimed on the label. There are 4 terms that mean basically the same thing: uncured, no artificial preservatives, no nitrates or nitrites added, and not preserved. So, okay. And so there we're appealing to the desire for human health of the consumer. Fully cooked, okay, fine. Gluten-free, obviously, right? True. And you can save $1. So they're appealing to the values of their customer. Let's look at some of the other things. These begin to meet the basic requirements for labeling. Half dozen eggs, keep refrigerated, sell by. Castle Lake No Family Farm is just down the road from me. While their label might be missing a few of the details, they have some basic information, including the plant code and free range and organic. Similarly, Pie Ranch, these eggs, context is a lot of the branding on all of these.
$7 a dozen, huh?
$7 a dozen. And so from this, these are sold in a really beautiful old barn along Highway 1 near Año Nuevo State Park. And you can see the chickens grazing out in the pasture. You can read in this barn the description of the farm and the educational programs they do with underserved youth from the city. And you just go, these are great. Yeah, these are worth $7 a dozen. Absolutely. And there's not a lot of branding. They kind of speak for themselves. The only thing is they're farm fresh eggs. And the buy fresh, buy local, which may be a draw to some of your consumers. And I understand that Missoula has a farm fresh, buy local. So something to consider whether having that label and using that label as part of your branding will be helpful. I went to our local natural food store, and the egg display is colorful. And I stood there wanting to take some pictures for this demonstration, and a family came up and said, wow, I'm marveling at how many kinds of eggs there are, with many of them with great virtues. And I said, well, how will you decide? They're like, well, I do like to buy local, and I guess this is the most local, but I like the dancing guy. So, branding, what works? Is it the dancing guy who says, heck with the tele.com business, I'm an egg farmer? So here are some of the claims. Let's look at some of the claims that are not regulated legally, but only by truth in labeling.
Hurdle made with
love. Made with love, 100% pure. And down the road, another farm says, eggs from happy hens on pasture. Is that what's the representation that's going to sell them? There's soy-free, there's non-GMO, there's hand-gathered, there's ones fed kelp that has high omega-3. Who cares? Who is your customer and what do they care about? Well, there's lots of things they care about here. Which ones will best promote your product? Which brands, what branding terminology will help you? Old-fashioned. Okay, farm fresh, well, that sounds good. And so there are a number of different terms used, and next time you pick up an egg carton, see which ones are the legally required verbiage, which ones are the unregulated claims, and now we'll look at, there are some claims with legal definitions, but for which certification isn't required. Cage-free is one that has gained actually some momentum, especially in California. They have gone as far as to pass Prop 2 in 2008, which comes into effect in 2015, that prohibits the use of battery cages for laying hens. So that's a significant step, maybe not a big step when we're talking about pastured poultry, but one that will impact a very broad section of egg producers. And it does have a legal definition. Then if you add outdoor access, then you become free range or free roaming. And it can be to a very simple patio, covered patio, bare yard, but they can go outside, so that makes them free range according to this. So I got these definitions out of the Food Safety Inspection Service, FSIS, has a website. Let's see. So now there are a number of other label claims that whoops. Oh, yeah, so some more that have legal definitions but no certification required. Natural, so you have to describe what it is that's natural. We'll see this more in the meat labels I'll show in just a minute. No antibiotics. No hormones is an interesting one because hormones are actually prohibited for use for all conventional, any kind of chickens or pork. So you have to add, federal regulations prohibit the use of hormones on the label if you say no hormones. Okay, we're following the law. And then there are some claims that require third-party certification. I'm going to go into most detail on USDA organic because that's what I'm most familiar with, but I think it's worth noting that some of the similarities and differences between the Global Animal Partnership and Animal Welfare Approved, in addition to the ones that we see a little more commonly, certified humane, American humane certified. Some customers will require kosher or halal, and so in order to use these, one needs to be certified by their respective entity. Then we move on to meat and some of the virtues of meat. Hormones never ever air chilled.
What does that mean? What does air chill?
Air chilled means that instead of being cooled in a bath, an ice water bath, that often includes chlorine or some other kind of sanitizer, they're
Cold air.
They're cold air.
Air conditioning.
Yeah.
Is that better than water?
There's chlorine in it, yeah.
It depends, yes. An inspector friend of mine said that after she did the calculations for how much chlorine is absorbed into the chicken after a bath, that she preferred not to eat that type of chicken. Here's the Smart Chicken label, and we can see, a number of the required use inspected. Keep refrigerated is just a federal requirement. Certified organic, and certified organic and the USDA seal can both be used together. Raised without antibiotics, free range, no added water, taste the difference, air chilled. So promoting that. Rocky dogs, locally raised and produced. They're appealing to that interest, that ideal of customers without the use of antibiotics, sustainably farmed. Many of that doesn't have a legal definition. No nitrates or nitrates. And this one's gluten-free too. Which actually may be useful information for a processed product such as a hot dog that might have things added to it. And allergy issues. Allergy issues may be a very important factor in some customers. There's an egg farmer, Chris Hay, in Woodland, California, who's raising soy-free eggs because some people are concerned about where soy seeds come from and how they're modified, and other people who do have allergies, and he's selling soy-free eggs for $10 a dozen in San Francisco farmers markets.
Is soy really going to show up in eggs, though? I mean, has it been proven?
I'm not sure, but the chickens do eat a lot of soy in the feed rations.
Uh-huh.
So what does come through?
Yeah.
I think
Has
it'd
that
be
been
interesting.
studied or anything?
I'm not sure. It'd be interesting to look into.
Yeah.
Raised by family farmers who are committed to sustainable and humane practices, all natural. So the all natural, he has a little asterisk that shows that it's minimally processed, no artificial ingredients. And then the no hormones has the federal regulations prohibit the use of hormones in what these have. Okay. And just some more examples of things that are required, things that are optional, things that need certification. Things that have legal definitions. Range grown, similar. And let's talk now a little bit more about the organic label. So USDA's National Organic Program has been in effect since 2002. If you sell over $5,000 in annual sales, you need to be certified in order to call your product organic. You have to start with an organic system plan in which you describe your practices, the substances you use, monitoring, record keeping, and need to be certified by an accredited certification agency, ACA. And the benefits are that they are federal standards, they are widely recognized, and as an organic inspector, they reflect several things that I care about, which include the environment, animal welfare, and human health. And the definition you're probably familiar with is that it's a production system that's managed to respond to site-specific conditions by integrating cultural, biological, and mechanical practices that foster cycling of resources, promote ecological balance, and conserve biodiversity, and maintain soil and water quality. And let's review some of the standards that apply specifically to poultry production. Organic standards, as I compare them to others, are fairly general in their purpose. So animal origin, chicks can actually come from any hatchery. They don't need to be from organic chickens and breeding stock. But they do need to be managed as organic as of day 2. They just mentioned some of the different kinds of brooding systems that we've seen on farms recently. They can be as simple as a horse trough or a cattle trailer that's been converted to the purpose, or a 2-tiered system with deep bedding. And this is one of the most critical stages in terms of being a successful poultry producer. There's a reducing risk of loss. Chicks are very vulnerable to temperature and to disease, and one needs to check on them and make sure that you are preventing, monitoring to prevent illness and death. Feed, one of the most important distinctions of the organic label is that any poultry or eggs sold as organic needs to be fed 100% organic feed their whole lives, and then approved supplements. Such as layers would have oyster shell, meat birds might have some mineral. And there are many types of feeders, but it's important that the feed stay clean, and to keep good quality of feed, one needs to have storage facilities that would exclude rodents and also protect the feed from moisture and heat. So they could be as simple as a very small scale garbage can with a tightly fitting lid, or a silo. Healthcare and treatment begins with selection of a species and breed that is appropriate to the region. And so here's, for the meat birds, a decision about whether one raises a Cornish cross or a slower growing, this one is a Freedom Ranger. My colleague Spence, and he presents the debate quite clearly. The Cornish cross is the one that people are most familiar with. It's the one we see in the market. It's the texture, it's the lots of breast meat that people are familiar with, and kind of the standard. It's not a great forager, though some of the earlier varieties are a little better than, there's different varieties of Cornish cross chickens. And Freedom Ranger is a little better forager. It's a slower growing. Rather than 8 weeks on the Cornish cross, it's more like 9 to 11 weeks. Oh, and I've heard sometimes longer, depending on the conditions, to where it reaches harvestable weight. And then other people were promoting heritage breeds, and dual-purpose birds, and one needs to ask, well, what are the benefits of that? There probably are a number of different kinds of benefits, and then in the branding, one has to ask, is that something that your customers care about, and will they pay more for a heritage bird? I understand that Jim Adkins of the Sustainable Poultry Network was one of your former speakers, and he has a lot to say about breeds. So one would need to keep records of purchasing the chicks, and mortality records as well. So the living conditions that the organic regulations specify are year-round access to the outdoors, shade, shelter, exercise areas, fresh air, and direct sunlight. Those are all well fulfilled in any pastured poultry system, and those are requirements of the organic program, with exceptions, of course, being when it's not good for the soil or water quality or for the health of the bird. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I'll just a question, because that's kind of one of the controversies I think about organic is access. I mean, it says access, how often, how long?
Yes.
You're going to get to that?
And that's part of the challenge of having a standard that is very kind of concept and principle based. Is then, there's the spirit of the law, and then there's the letter of the law. And many producers would say, well, I've provided access. We saw a few slides back the house with a number of chickens in it, about 9,000 chickens in it, with doors that provide access to an outdoor patio with some hay. That meets the letter of the law, and they are certified organic. Does it meet the spirit? I think that will be debated soon and often. And there are certain benefits that are inherent in providing a pastured system. The quality of egg or meat that comes out of a truly pastured system is different, and that's why we're talking about branding. Like, is organic? Is it enough to say this is organic? This product, whatever this is, does it need additional distinction? And of course, the Cornucopia Institute has rated all the certified organic egg operations, and
The national scale certified organic eggs.
yes, so they've taken operations that are certified to the National Organic Program and then done a little more investigation into them. And the operation that won't be named with the patio with some straw and things gets a 1 egg rating. And I was pleased to see that the Mission Mountain Organic Farm gets 5 egg rating. So they've evaluated ownership structure and egg supply and commitment to organics and single or double hen houses and some other things that are related but not exactly specified in the organic regulations. Okay, we're getting a little, so let's keep going on the organic regulations and what they actually mean. It actually is specified in the health care, in the living conditions, that clean water for drinking. Of course, this is very closely related to health care too. They go hand in hand. Clean water is critical to the health of a bird in any production system. Coccidiosis is a very common disease and can be reduced by having clean, fresh, cool water. Chickens drink twice as much as they eat. So if they don't have good water, they're not going to eat as much and will not be as productive. If they have good, fresh, clean water that is cool, because they prefer cool water, not really hot water, they'll be healthier and more productive. And the delivery systems, there are many different kinds of delivery systems. This feeds down into this with a horse trough valve. Some of the continuous flow systems would tend to stay cleaner. There are other nipple systems that actually wouldn't have like a standing water that is a presents a risk for bacteria to sit there and grow. Many of the waterers are designed such that there is a pool of water that some of the other systems would be self-cleaning and wouldn't have a standing water. Here are some other examples of meat bird pens. And so the organic regulations require shelter that's designed for natural maintenance, comfort behaviors, opportunity to exercise, okay? Appropriate air circulation temperature, and reduction of potential for livestock injury. So clearly, that's really an important issue when it comes to protecting birds from predators, because everything likes chicken. Just a couple other, we're speaking about the temporary confinement is allowed under organic, but for these specific reasons. Inclement weather, stage of life, such as a baby chick, you're not going to put it right out on pasture until it has enough feathering to cope in that environment. Health, safety, or well-being, risk to soil or water quality, preventative healthcare procedures. And the vaccination is encouraged and allowed and encouraged, especially important for Merrick's disease or other endemic diseases.
So vaccination does not alter the organic state?
Vaccination is allowed and allowed under organic regulations, and encouraged really in terms of a preventative health care plan.
In treating for coccidiosis as well? Okay.
For any endemic diseases. Yeah. That's my understanding. And I haven't seen a lot of operations actually vaccinate for coccidiosis, but most egg operations would vaccinate for Merrick's disease, which is...
I did not know that they vaccinate for coccidiosis. I thought they just treated the water for coccidiosis.
Right, so those are two different things. So vaccination is, as soon as the chicks are hatched, they would receive a vaccination for Merrick's disease. If you're putting something in the water, like an antibiotic, that would not be allowed under organic standards. Important distinction. There's a number of different kinds of housing that would provide the kind of protection that animals need. These are very creative. Starts with a used cotton trailer converted into a hen house. This was formerly a mobile home, has new lease on life. That's an eggmobile on an early bird farm. And as with the trailer hitch there, it's very important to protect the birds from predators. And to accomplish that, it needs to be flush to the ground so that no predator can get underneath and go have a dinner, a chicken dinner. So there are a number of different ways that people move. Most of these pens are like 10 by 12. And there are a number of dollies or adaptations that people use. This was a nice one that you lift it up and just slide this wheel under, and just gives you a few inches of space that you can pull that around. Many different design options, but very important. And protecting from predators, of course, may involve other strategies such as the door openers and closers. Automatic helps with management in some circumstances, even though you probably are checking on the birds anyway. Guard dogs can be very important to a larger system where you have more birds in a larger area. And it's important to note that pasture is actually not required for organic certification of chickens. Pasture is required for ruminants. Outdoor access is required for chickens, but pasture is not. It's an added benefit. And so chickens are not ruminants. Chickens,
What is a ruminant?
A ruminant is like a cow, a sheep, a goat that has the 4 chambers of the stomach, and they're able to digest cellulose. But chickens, while they get quality of feed from pasture, they don't necessarily gain a lot of quantity. They need to be fed feed rations chickens would have a really hard time being very productive without a balanced feed ration. The pasture provides the additional quality of feed, the vitamins and minerals that makes the meat and the eggs and the fat of much higher quality. How many of you make chicken soup? Most of you. So that, to me, I've always made chicken soup, and once I started having access to pastured poultry products, I was very pleased to see that the fat is a very different quality. On a conventional chicken, you get that hard crust of fat when put it in the refrigerator. And with pastured poultry, the fat is soft and does not harden even at low temperatures. So one could look into the qualities of that make it better for our health. But for me, it's a much higher quality food.
Well, and that can, just going to add to that, that can be a marketing tool also. And I know that Tom, the guy who spoke in Livingston, was going to do fat analysis on his chickens, so he could, in his marketing, say, this bird has X percentage fat.
Yeah.
And show that they're healthier for that reason.
And I don't have the scientific analysis to differentiate, but I think that would be worth doing because it is distinctly different. And I think that is part of the quality of a pastured bird. Okay, so to wrap up that, will you certify organic or not certify organic? Or certify to any set of standards? What's the feasibility? Can you do it? Can you comply with these regulations? Do they make sense on your farm and in your operation? If the answer is yes, then that's a really good possibility. Then you do some cost-benefit analysis. Additional production costs. So I compared the cost of feed, organic and conventional feed. What's the difference? So for a broiler, consume about 15 pounds of feed in an 8-week life of a broiler. And if the cost of organic feed is a lot higher than conventional feed, then that's an additional cost that would be different between just a pastured bird with conventional feed versus a certified organic bird that must be fed its entire life, 100% certified organic feed. In Montana, the price difference between organic and conventional isn't as high as other places, isn't nearly as high as it is in California. So I figured if you raise 1,000 broilers, the additional cost for a Cornish cross 8-week bird was probably about $770 per 1,000 birds. The certification costs by the Montana Department of Agriculture have steps according to how much you make. But let's say you have a small operation making less than $20,000. You could also, there's another range from 20 to 100,000. The certification costs, including inspection fees by the Montana Department of Agriculture, should end up being well under $1,000. And that includes a 1% assessment on the sales. And then there's a price premium. So the costs would be the cost of organic feed, cost of certification, and then you look at, well, what's the benefit? If I can, according to Jeff's calculations, an organic bird sells for about $2 a pound more than a humane, a natural bird. So at $4 pounds per bird times 1,000 birds, we're looking at about $8,000 gain in price difference. So I would say that the cost of getting certified organic is well worth it because it is so well recognized. And some markets would buy products only if they're certified organic. Some, it would be preferable. And definitely there's a price advantage and compare the branding. Now let's look quickly at some of the other certification options that there are. One that's emerging, I think they're still developing. They have meat bird standards, and these are, we'll review some of those. The Global Animal Partnership, not to be confused with Good Agricultural Practices, the acronym of both are GAP. So this is from their website, their virtues. And in California, in order to sell to a Whole Foods market, one needs to be participating in the GAP 5-step program. So that would be a strong incentive if that were an important market to develop. And it may be probably different with your local stores and restaurants. So they have a number of different standards, plans, protocols, procedures, and training that needs to include a health plan, biosecurity procedures, animal source and health. So these are outlined in great detail, and I have a copy if people would like to look at that. Animal sourcing, they need to be not genetically engineered birds. They need to be placed within 48 hours of the hatchery. They specify specific methods of euthanasia. They specify animal care and management, that you need to remove the dead birds every day and observe at least twice a day. Wouldn't we do that anyway? Right? So these are prevent injury, prevent exposure to toxic materials, evaluate foot pad dermatitis and lameness. Feasibility of doing those things, I'd say those are all things we want to do anyway as responsible poultry producers. Feed and water needs to be available, clean and close. Feeding unrestricted, good hygiene, no animal products fed, no cages, and then they specify daylight and lighting. And then the steps, these are all for each of the 5 steps, but then step 3, step 4 are higher standards. Steps 3 and 4 are the ones that require outside at the age of 4 weeks. And step 3, the area needs to be 25% vegetated. Step 4, 50%. And step 5, 75%. So then they have further specifications about loading, transport, rodent control, predator control, wild bird control. And records and documentation are very important. Now, it's kind of important to know the distinction between records and documentation. Documentation would be like the receipt you get from the hatchery that shows what you purchased. Records are, I picked up a dead bird and I'm going to keep a mortality record. It's something one keeps oneself. So we could ask the same questions. Is it feasible? What's the cost-benefit analysis? We'd have to see what the cost of Global Animal Partnership 5-step participation is for your operation. And will participation in this program further my branding and marketing goals?
Hey, Anne?
Yeah.
So with this 5-step standard, is it self-regulated or how is it?
There's an application to fill out and you have to be certified by the
Does
GAP.
somebody come
And somebody
come
comes and
visit your
inspects.
farm?
Yeah,
Okay.
and there's, just as there is with organic, it has to be at a certain time when the operations are happening so that they can be observed. And another one that's recommended by the Pastured Poultry Foundation is the Animal Welfare Approved. Now this one's interesting because this one doesn't involve a cost to the farmer. And the standards are, I would say, describe what most of our ideals about pastured poultry production are. That there's ownership, selection. They go into some detail about choosing birds that thrive in the climate that you live in. That's important, right? That's feasible to comply with, but also just a good idea. Free range, forage-based. So this one's a little more rigorous standard. Outdoor systems are by design, and there needs to be a record of the source. You need to develop a breeding plan for replacement stock. It doesn't say you need to actually buy that, buy all the chicks, or hatch all your own chicks, but there's a dialogue about that. They recommend traditional breeds and dual-purpose meat-egg operations, and standards. So a number of specific suggestions.
What is GE bird and AI for this?
Genetically engineered bird, and AI is artificial insemination. So it needs to be a natural breeding program.
Are they genetically engineered?
I am not as familiar with that idea, but that was mentioned in both the GAP and the animal welfare standards, so further information needed. And it goes into a great bit of detail about promoting health and having regular preventative health care. And there is a distinction here between organic and the animal welfare, that they do allow the use of antibiotics when it's recommended. Organic does not allow the use of antibiotics ever. And they specify also their preferred euthanasia methods, which are more specific. GAP has a few more options. You need to have a plan for emergencies. Well, I hadn't really thought about that as part of a certification program, but that's a good idea. Okay, why not? Flock management, the size, nest box material, no forced molting is common there, is required. Food and water, of course, fresh clean water. Dairy and byproducts actually are allowed for feeding, but not other types of animal byproducts. Yogurt and whey have been fed by some of the operations we've seen, and I think that that has some great health benefits. And then they speak in some depth about the ranging and foraging access as early as possible, from no later than 4 weeks, and maintaining range and forage quality, and guarding against erosion and pollution, and having soil tests. And those are all things that are very consistent with organic regulations. And testing soil is not required by organic regulations, but it is a good idea, especially if chickens are in one place for a long time. The manure has a great deal of phosphorus, and that could become a water quality issue. So good idea. They do allow herbicides as a last resort, which organic regulations do not allow. So they have, just, I'm not going to go through each of these, but these are the categories of topics that they cover, and have point-by-point recommendations and requirements to be animal welfare approved. So we can ask of this, what's the feasibility? What's the cost-benefit analysis? Well, they don't actually require organic feed, and they don't have a certification cost. So the cost will be very low. It would just be the cost of implementing any additional practices that you might not otherwise implement. And as far as I can tell, that most of their requirements are a pretty good idea anyway. And then ask, well, will participation in this program and the time I spend to get certified, will attaining the certification or using this symbol further my branding and marketing goals? So I think in conclusion, we want to have good systems design that makes sense in terms of the business. I want to emphasize that record keeping is your friend, because in each of these systems, record keeping shouldn't just be something you do to meet a requirement for a certification or a regulation. It should be something that really works for your business and helps you understand it. And that's the thing that I've enjoyed hearing from organic farmers as I've done inspections, is, and gone on occasion back to a place that I've been before, and there's a dairy farmer that I'm thinking of that they had just become certified when I first visited them, and a couple of years later they said, you know, at first we were keeping these records just because it was a requirement, but now we're seeing that our calves are so much healthier because we're seeing the patterns. And then we're able to identify and solve the problems much more readily. So I think that's the value of any kind of records, is seeing how does your system work, and that's including time, money, and production, animal health. What makes sense, what works, how can it be improved? So plan it, try it, evaluate how it worked, track it, and then evaluate, and then you can make a new decision about where I go from here. And then branding for product differentiation, so that your marketing plan meets your farming goals. There's a number of tools that Azure has available, so you can ask for any of these. A number of things are on the jump drive that's available, many more available on the website, and then there's a few that are in draft form that, like the feed conversion worksheet, very useful. You know, you can write down this week, how much feed did I feed, and how did that convert into eggs or meat? And you can see in very real time, is this making sense? How much do I need to charge for this bird or for this dozen eggs? What makes the most sense? And then price for resilience. Some people say pricing for profit, but I think what we're really after is farm resilience. you need to make more than just breaking even in order for your farm to weather the things that come along. There are always things that come along that are unexpected. So how can we price our products so that we have enough resilience to be able to purchase what we need to, or to recover from a loss when the predator does come in and get 60 hens that are just ready to start laying? What happens then? How do we recover from that? How do we have the resilience? And it's worthwhile to keeping very good financial records and thinking about variable and fixed costs. It's a very economic term, but there are very few costs that are actually proportional to, like, you know, if you have more birds, then you need more feed. But you actually have to buy it in either a 50-pound bag or a 1-ton tote. So there are steps to the more fixed cost. Some are small steps, like another sack of feed. Some are larger steps, like, okay, I'm going to get certified, and it's going to cost me several $100s. So making those decisions in ways that make sense for your cash flow budget. And Jeff's going to cover a lot more of that. So, in conclusion, if you have questions or need further information, call ATRA, call me. We're here to work with you, and we're always learning, so we'll learn together. Thanks.
I do have a question, actually,
Okay.
on the eggs, and excuse my ignorance here, but I'm trying to kind of understand the time frame. I mean, I understand they lay an egg, you have a period of time which we haven't kind of quantified, and then you box them, and then you have 30 days.
Yeah.
Explain that quantification there, that's period of time. I mean, I understand you keep them refrigerated. How long can you keep them? I mean, what's...
So, eggs are a pretty sturdy item. In some countries, they don't even refrigerate them, but that is not allowed in this country. So the rules pretty much specify that you need to get the eggs as soon as possible, gather them from the nest, and store them in a cool, shaded place. If not, and the regulations are not super specific about that, but I'm trying to remember if 50 degrees is something I've made up, or if that's just one of the larger egg producers that I've talked to. I think that's what they do, is they try to keep them it's in the warehouse, and it's not in the refrigerator, but it's in a cool place. And then they get them out, and they run them through the whole washing procedure. Washing is a really important handling thing that we could have a whole presentation on that, but the basic thing is, there's bacteria on the surface of almost any egg, because salmonella it's in the chicken system, and in some chickens, it's in the tract that the egg comes down. So salmonella bacteria may be on the surface of a lot of eggs. And the risk management that an egg handler wants to do is not let that bacteria go inside the egg. So in order to do that, there's a membrane. And if you wash an egg in water that's at least 90 degrees and at least 20 degrees warmer than the egg, then that prevents the flow of things from the outside of the egg into the egg. So, and then from that point, your question is mostly about time. So that's an unspecified period from lay to washing and packing. And eggs don't actually have to be washed, but they do need to be cleaned. So you can arrange your system so that they're as clean as possible, and then the washing is minimal. When you use the materials that you use to wash and sanitize an egg need to be approved by FDA, and they also need to be approved for organic regulations. So that's another thing to make note of and include in your organic system plan if you're going to be certified. So that's any number of days, but you want to maintain a good quality egg, you want to keep them cool and have that time be as short as reasonable. And then from the pack date, then there's 30 days to the sell-by date. Yeah?
So when you eat eggs from your chickens, do you do anything to the outside to prevent the salmonella? Like not for commercial use, but just, in your home?
I like to wash off the dirt.
Yeah.
Yeah, and use warm water. And that's an important distinction too. There's cleaning and then there's sanitation.
Right.
And those are two really different things. Getting the visible dirt off is a first step, an obvious first step that's required by the USDA grading standards. Sanitation is not necessarily required, but it's often done by the larger operations, not necessarily by the smaller. And I had a mother who was trained in microbiology, and she did not ever let us eat raw eggs. It's just a good idea to cook your eggs before you eat them. So that's that's where a person can take personal responsibility for one's food safety. But if you're a producer and you're sending eggs out into the world, you're going to want to make sure that they're as clean as and bacteria-free as possible, because none of us wants to cause illness or death. And that's the spirit behind all the regulations, is to have a safe, healthy, wholesome product that's fit for human consumption. Anything else? I know that we have a lot more people to hear from, and I'm looking forward to hearing from them. But I'll be here all day. Feel free to ask me any questions anytime.